Joe Sulzer of the Jewish vaudeville duo Smith and Dale credited black street performers on the Lower East Side in the 1890s as the inspiration for his act. "A colored fellow used to come and dance on our street. It was called buck dancing. He had sand and threw it on the sidewalk and danced. The sound of the sand and the shuffle of his feet fascinated me, and I would try to dance like him. It made me feel I wanted to go on the stage." Less famous Jews were similarly taken with black music. In the 1880s, the journalist and social reformer Jacob Riis noted that the young people in Jewtown, the Lower East Side, are inordinately fond of dancing. Jewish moral reformer Bell Lindner Israels despaired that in Jewish neighborhoods, the glare of lights and the blare of music strikes you on every side. In the 1910s and 1920s, Hadassah chapters and Jewish youth and recreation centers in cities across the country regularly staged shows featuring Jewish entertainers in blackface, singing in mock black dialect, and dancing the most intricate jazz steps of the day. Jewish immigrants took over vaudeville theater in the early 20th century and made it into a celebration of unseemly pleasures. Most disturbing to the disciplinarians of the time was the dancing of vaudeville performers, in particular the undulations of female dancers and the tough dances in which copulation was simulated. Like the first Irish immigrants, Eastern European Jews who settled in the United States seemed unaware or unconcerned with the American color line. According to the historian Jeffrey Gurok, they showed no easily recognizable unwillingness towards living with and among blacks. By the 1920s, thousands of Jews lived and operated businesses in the African-American neighborhoods of Harlem and Chicago's South Side. One of the more remarkable and underreported examples of Jewish identification with African Americans was the common use of nigger by Jews as a nickname. In Michael Gold's autobiographical novel, Jews Without Money, the narrator's best friend is a virile boy named Nigger. Jewish gangsters who ruled many big city streets in the early part of the 20th century often adopted the same nom de guerre. There was Yoski Nigger, of the Yiddish Black Hand, Nigger Benny Snyder, of the Greaser Gang, Harry Nig Rosen, of Philadelphia's 69th Street Gang, and Isidore Nigger Goldberg, of the 20th Ward Group in Chicago. There was even a Jewish brothel owner in New York known as Nigger Ruth. And down on Pell Street in New York's Chinatown, there was a cafe owned and operated by a Russian Jew named Nigger Mike Salter, the man who hired Irving Berlin as a waiter. Milton Metz Mesereau, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants in Chicago and one of the great jazz clarinetists of his age, went so far as to declare his racial defection. After a teenaged excursion to Missouri, he remembered, "The Southerners had called me a nigger lover there." Solid. I not only loved these colored boys, but I was one of them. I felt closer to them than I felt to the whites, and I even got the same treatment they got. By the time I reached home, I knew that I was going to spend all my time from then on sticking close to Negroes. They were my kind of people. And I was going to learn their music and play it for the rest of my days. I was going to be a musician, a Negro musician, hipping the world about the blues the way only Negroes can. Mesereau learned to play the clarinet, performed in otherwise all-black jazz bands, married a black woman, and moved to Harlem. He not only declared himself a voluntary Negro, but also became a bad nigger. In the 1930s, Mesereau established himself as the primary drug dealer in the jazz scene, and in 1940 he was arrested and convicted of possession and intent to distribute marijuana. When he arrived at Rikers Island, he told the guards he was black and was sent to the segregated prison's black section. In 1946, Ebony magazine honored Mesereau in a feature story titled Case History of an Ex-White Man for being one of the few whites to have passed through the Jim Crow portals of Negro life to live on equal terms with its harried inhabitants. Of course, the article noted, physically speaking, Mesro couldn't pass for Negro by any stretch of the imagination. His skin is too white. Nonetheless, the article maintained his conversion to the race has taken place largely within himself. In psychological makeup, he is completely a black man and proudly admits it. The Jew is a white man. To many historians, Jewish attachment to jazz, basketball, dance halls, and blackface was evidence of Jewish assimilation into American culture. Yet those scholars do not appreciate that there have been many and conflicting American cultures. The Jews who danced orgiastically and called themselves niggers became bad Americans. To understand that even during the Jazz Age, good Americans did not have rhythm, we need only listen to the music that was played and the dances that were danced in institutions that trained immigrants to be American. The historian Derek Vaillant has written that social workers among immigrants in the first decade of the 20th century moved swiftly to single out specific musical forms, such as ragtime and jazz, and their audience for censure if they challenged conventional expectations of self-control, women's place, sexual mores, and youth behavior, or if they appeared to encourage social mixing. Fearing the attendant evil of the modern styles of dancing, social workers and city officials banned the playing of ragtime music or any other music with suggestive titles or words, or with any form of improper dancing at dances catering to immigrants. Forbidden moves included close dancing, improper position, a distorted position, and freak, unnecessary, or indecent movements, such as suggestive wiggling, frequent low dipping, or extreme swaying. Dancers were allowed only to exhibit self-control and self-government in their movements. Jewish American leaders were among the first to warn that improper dancing and other forms of un-American behavior were more likely to break out among immigrants who lived in close proximity to blacks. In 1911, a writer for the Forward, the leading Jewish American newspaper, decried the mixing of Jewish shopkeepers with blacks. To make a living, the grocer must give up all of the comforts of the outside civilization and live among the old ramshackle ruins of the Negro neighborhood, where his children are influenced by the half-wild and barbaric street life of the black. The grocer learns the black's English and finds himself at a very low station in life. In the Yiddish press of the 1920s and 1930s, according to historian Haziah Diner, there were probably more articles on black crime than any other single black theme in the Yiddish press. The headlines for these articles were either gruesome or explosive. Crazy Negro kills 4 people in Chicago. Mad Negro bites policeman who dies. Black accused of trying to chloroform a white girl and rape her. And Negro found guilty of murder of girl. 2 more girls attacked brutally yesterday. Typifies the Yiddish press style. Most importantly, the Yiddish press highlighted the danger of mixing with blacks. The Forward ran several long articles on Harlem nightlife, partly to discourage Jewish youth from slumming there. All the newspapers concluded that it was dangerous for whites to patronize Harlem cabarets and saloons. In Diner's survey of Yiddish newspapers from 1915 to 1935, she found 8 reports of Jewish women being attacked or raped by black men, several other articles on Jews being shot or stabbed by blacks for no apparent reason, and scores of reports of black violence against Jews during robberies, not just of merchants but of Jews waiting on subway platforms, walking in the hallways of apartment buildings, passing on the streets, or in their homes. At about this time, Jewish biology began to change. In the 1920s and 1930s, several Jewish American intellectuals argued that Jews were in fact a distinct race, but one whose characteristics were perfectly consistent with American respectability. In his Famous Musicians of a Wandering Race, 1928, Gadal Selesky argued that the bloodstream of the Jew courses through the spiritual veins of every major art that modern civilization has risen to honor, and praised Jewish American composers whose work was entirely free from the barbaric influence of jazz and from the lurid wail of the saxophone. Similarly, Mac Davis's They Are All Jews, From Moses to Einstein, 1937, presented 60 biographical sketches of Jews who made immense contributions to civilization as soldier, statesman, explorer, pugilist, poet, scientist, rabbi, actress, and businessman, without mentioning any of the equally prominent Jews in blackface minstrelsy or jazz. While some in the non-Jewish press noticed that Jewish athletes shared with African Americans a natural facility with their bodies, many prominent Jews steered attention to their upstanding demeanor. Harold Reigelman, a national leader of the Zeta Beta Tau fraternity, praised Jewish athletes for their sportsmanship on the athletic field, their reserve and decency of deportment, and the inherent fitness of their character. The American Hebrew hailed University of Michigan football star Benny Friedman for his character, intrinsic merit, and pleasing deportment, and basketball legend Nat Holman for his dignified bearing as a man of culture, his well-enunciated speech, and poise, and his clean, high-minded Americanism. The Jewish editor of Ring magazine, Nat Fleischer, noted Benny Leonard's hair-trigger brain. Even Leonard himself argued that it was the Jewish fighters who put the science in the game. Jewish scholar Max Margolis helped counter comparisons to black physicality by declaring in a 1923 issue of the B'nai B'rith News that biologically the Jew is a white man. Some went so far as to claim that anyone who excelled with his body could not be a real Jew, as the Daily Jewish Courier said in 1923 about Jewish boxers. As far as our highly honored members of the fighting fraternity, we may say that if the Jewish people has anything to contribute to the common civilization and culture of the race, such contributions are rather to be sought in the realm of their intellects than in their fists. As a matter of fact, none of these pugilists may be said to be Jews, except in the accident of their birth. Similarly, a 1939 booklet distributed by the Anti-Defamation League stated categorically that Jews had achieved whiteness. Scientifically and correctly speaking, there are 3 great races in the world: the black, yellow, and white. Within the white race, all the sub-races have long since been mixed, and we Jews are part of the general admixture. Some who acknowledged Jewish participation in jazz credited Jews with civilizing the music. Critic Abraham Roback argued in 1927 that the people to bring into the wild gyrations of the original jazz a note of restraint, of anxiety and foreboding were the Jewish songwriters who were versatile enough to catch the spirit of Negro music. If you ask what America would have done without the host of Jewish composers and what the music of the street would have been like, the answer would be that jazz would still have had its day, but it would have been a more puerile and less varied kind of jazz. The original Negro jazz is shapeless and chaotic. In most of the Jewish versions, you can follow motifs. Others simply wished that the Jews would leave black music alone. As Rabbi Stephen Wise wrote in 1924, jazz is one of the inevitable expressions of what might be called the jazzy morale of mood in America. When America regains its soul, jazz will go, not before. That is to say, it will be relegated to the dark and scarlet haunts whence it came, and whither unwept it will return, after America's soul is reborn. Belle Moskowitz made her life's work to rid her people of their rhythm. She told her brethren, You cannot dance night after night, held in the closest of sensual embraces, with every effort made in the style of dancing to appeal to the worst in you and remain unshaken by it. Moskowitz and other reformers led a campaign to regulate the styles of dancing in dance halls, and by the 1920s, more than 60 city governments passed ordinances banning lascivious, debaucher, and sensual movements on public dance floors. Jewish movie executives soon instituted a similar purification program in their industry. In 1934, they began to enforce the Motion Picture Production Code, which forbade, among many things, the presentation of dances suggesting or representing sexual actions or indecent passions, dances intended to excite the emotional reaction of an audience, dances with movement of the breasts, and excessive body movement while the feet are stationary. Yiddish-language newspapers during the 1920s and 1930s paid careful attention to black-Jewish relations and helped establish what might be called the liberal Jewish view on race. Influential, widely read newspapers such as The Forward, The Morgan Journal, and the Tageblatt agreed upon very little, according to historian Haziah Diner, but race and the lot of black Americans proved a striking exception. All the major Yiddish papers condemned legal segregation, supported civil rights, and praised black achievements. But they also made it clear that Jews and blacks should be culturally separate. Blacks had rhythm. Good Jews did not. In the Yiddish press, according to Diner, descriptions of Negro life in Harlem were replete with dancing, gyrating men and women, the sounds of bongo drums, which one Tageblatt writer called their national instrument, resounded, and exuberant, vibrant music filled the streets. In one article, Maurice Schwartz, a star of Yiddish theater, claimed in no uncertain terms that rhythm ran in the Negro's blood. Similarly, the English-language Jewish Tribune wrote that one should expect colored dancers to put about 50 times more pep into a performance than the average white girl cares to attempt, and the American Hebrew declared that the rhythm of the Negro is vicious. It is of kinesthetic urge. One sways and bends with it. Overall, Jewish papers asserted that musical and rhythmic expression were the most distinctive characteristics of black cultural life. But in the very same issue in which civil rights were championed and black musical genius celebrated, warnings were made to Jews who might cross the color line. Occasional references were made to the apparent affinity several Jewish entertainers had for black music, but any similarity between the two groups was attributed to suffering, not sensuality. As a forward review of the jazz singer put it, the film's Negro songs contained the minor key of Jewish music, the wail of the chazan, the cry of anguish of a people who had suffered. The son of a line of rabbis well knows how to sing the songs of the most cruelly wronged people in the world's history. During World War II, with success demanding national unity, the federal government officially welcomed Jews and Italians into the white race. In 1943, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, for the first time, denoted all Europeans as white on its forms for immigrants seeking American citizenship. The military remained thoroughly segregated between black and white. Even blood supplies from black and white donors were kept separate. But extraordinary measures were taken to meld Americans of European origins. According to the historian Gary Gerstle, the military for the first time formed regiments of white men of every ethnicity and nationality. Sometimes together for as long as 4 years, these units became extraordinary vehicles for melding the many streams of Euro-Americans into one. And this assimilatory process was racialized from its inception because no blacks and few Asians were permitted to take part, in the sense that they were excluded from regiments defined as white. The effect of this integration was profound. According to historian Eric L. Goldstein, more than any other wartime development, the thorough integration of Jews and Catholics into the American military helped cement the public's view of these groups as unambiguously white. Suddenly, Irish, Jews, and Italians were members of ethnicities rather than races. In the 1940s, best-selling books such as Ruth Benedict's The Races of Mankind and Ashley Montague's Man's Most Dangerous Myth, The Fallacy of Race, rejected the existence of races among Europeans and claimed that differences among whites were cultural rather than biological. Opinion polls conducted after the war showed that for the first time, a majority of Americans did not identify Jews as a race. During and after the war, Jews acted on the fears of racial mixing by moving en masse out of Harlem, the south side of Chicago, and other neighborhoods that were taking in black migrants from the South. Soon, fewer Jewish Americans were participating in renegade culture than observing it. As Goldstein notes, countless memoirs record the fascination of Jewish youth of these years with African American jazz artists, whose performances in nightclubs and dance halls they would often attend. At the same time, the number of Jewish jazz musicians declined in the post-war period, and those who continued with the music, including such greats as Stan Getz, Lee Konitz, Herbie Mann, Red Rodney, Stan Levy, Lou Levy, Paul Desmond, Teddy Charles, and Shelley Mann, tended to follow the post-war away from swing and into non-danceable, cool jazz and intricate, highly technical bebop. Jews also abandoned sports, in particular, sports considered to be less cerebral and more primitive than others. According to Jewish boxing historian Alan Bodner, by 1950 there were virtually no Jewish boxers, and their number has been minuscule ever since. A similar decline occurred among Jewish trainers, but Jewish managers, promoters, and matchmakers continue to maintain a presence. According to Peter Levine, by the late 1940s, Jewish dominance of the American Basketball League was in clear decline. In the 1950 season, only 10 of the top 36 scorers were Jewish, and in the following year, league rosters indicate that only 9%, or 11 of the ABL's players, were Jewish. By the 1960s, Jews were more likely to be found in NBA boardrooms than on the hard wood. The most telling symbol of the Jewish loss of physical dexterity was the fate of the great Philadelphia Sfaz. In the early 1950s, the Sfaz, then led by the talented point guard Red Klotz, defeated the all-black Harlem Globetrotters in 2 exhibition games. Klotz later bought the Sfaz and changed the name of the team to the Washington Generals. In 1953, Klotz entered into an agreement to make the Generals the regular opponent of the Globetrotters in exhibition games staged to show off the black team's spectacular skills. Between 1953 and 1995, the Generals won 6 games against the Globetrotters and lost more than 13,000. After World War II, a physically inhibited, highly talkative suburban family replaced the blackface dancers and basketball players as the most famous Jews in America. What began as a radio program in the 1930s about Jewish family living in a Bronx tenement, The Goldbergs, became a television program in the 1940s and 1950s about the same family relocated to the suburbs and obsessed with fitting in with their new Gentile neighbors. In 1950, The Goldbergs was the 7th highest-rated series on television. The show's creator and star, Gertrude Berg, was awarded the Emmy Award for Best Actress. And Philip Loeb, who played the patriarch of the family, was named Television Father of the Year by the Boys Clubs of America. Whereas Jews in popular culture before the war whirled about the screen and performed high-tempo dance numbers, most of the action in The Goldbergs takes place at the kitchen table or in the living room, where chess is played, classical music emanates from the phonograph, and the conversation focuses on how to become more modern. The topic of one episode is the shame that Berg's character feels at not being able to participate in the new Latin dance craze. "You know, I only waltz," she says. Jews continued to be featured prominently in American entertainment, but further and further removed from the sounds and moves of blackness. In the 1960s and 1970s, the most famous Jewish entertainers were the great popularizers of classical music, Aaron Copland and Leonard Bernstein. Romantic balladeers like Eddie Fisher, Barbra Streisand, Edie Gourmet, Steve Lawrence, Burt Bacharach, Barry Manilow, and Neil Diamond. Intellectual folk singers such as Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Art Garfunkel, Carole King, Janis Ian, and Leonard Cohen. And a phenomenal number of film score composers, including Alfred Newman, Elmer Bernstein, Bernard Herrmann, Marvin Hamlish, Danny Elfman, Jerry Goldsmith, Philip Glass, James Horner, Howard Shore, Alan Menken, and Randy Newman. The physically awkward but intellectually gifted Nebbish was foregrounded in film and television by Woody Allen, Dustin Hoffman, and Richard Dreyfuss, and later by Jerry Seinfeld, Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, and Larry David. By the late 20th century, Jews had left the dance floor and arrived in America. But Jewish Americans who wish to revive their renegade heritage can now find heroes in the unlikeliest places. Though most Americans now think of her as the kindly former judge on a popular talent contest and are probably unaware of her ethnic background, Paula Abdul is as funky and as Jewish as any of the dancing Hebrews of the vaudeville era. Her father, Harry Abdul, is a Syrian Jew, and her mother, Lorraine Reichis, was born into one of the few Jewish families in St. Boniface, Manitoba. Abdul regularly attends Chabad of Bel Air, an Orthodox synagogue in Los Angeles. Since 1988, she has placed 5 singles in the top 40 of Billboard's Hot R&B Hip-Hop Songs chart, formerly called the Black Singles Chart, and 10 singles in the top 40 of Billboard's Hot Dance Club Party chart, a weekly national survey of the most popular songs in dance clubs. Jews have also made impressive inroads into hip-hop. The Beastie Boys, a group formed in the early 1980s by Michael Diamond, Adam Yauch, and Adam Horovitz, are one of the longest-lived and most successful hip-hop groups. Rick Rubin, who convinced the Beastie Boys to switch from punk rock to hip-hop early in their career, founded Def Jam Records and created much of the music of the 1980s that made hip-hop the dominant genre in the music industry. In the late 1980s, Michael Barron of Far Rockaway, Queens, grabbed the mic and stage name MC Search, styled his kinky hair into a high-top fade, busted MC Hammer-type dance moves, and became one of the leading rappers of his time. As frontman for the group Third Base, and later as a solo act, Search produced 5 top 20 singles on the Billboard rap charts. The Beasties and Search are often credited with creating the archetype of the white nigga, or wigga. Today, 2 of the most sought-after producers of hip-hop beats are Scott Storch, an aficionado of bling jewelry and founder of Tough Jew Productions, and Alan Daniel Mayman, better known as The Alchemist, a master of combining disparate noises into hip-hop hits, who took his name from the Sephardic Jews of the Middle Ages who mixed common metals into gold, silver, and potions for eternal life. Mock them all you like as inauthentic wannabes, but Jewish wiggas might be truer to their heritage than any accountant, lawyer, or doctor will ever be.